Imagine waking up in a world that is nothing like your own, one where Hitler's iron grip extends across continents. The once lively and culturally rich Europe has been transformed into a bleak and oppressive empire ruled by the Third Reich. Countries like France, the United Kingdom, and Poland, once centers of art, democracy, and freedom, now lie crushed under the heavy hand of fascism. There are no more free elections, no more protests, and no more freedom of speech. In this world, dissent is treason, and treason is a death sentence. The streets of Paris, London, and Warsaw are eerily quiet, patrolled by Nazi soldiers. Every conversation is guarded, for even the faintest whisper against the regime could result in a neighbor reporting you to the Gestapo. Family members do not trust one another. Fear is the dominant force that keeps people in line. The radio blares Nazi propaganda day and night, filling homes with messages of Aryan superiority, Hitler's infallibility, and the greatness of the Reich. Newspapers, television, and every form of media are under tight control, serving as the voice of the regime. People over time have forgotten what it feels like to be free. Children who once played freely in the streets now grow up in a state of complete indoctrination. From their earliest years, they are taught to worship Hitler and embrace his vision of a racially pure world. School curriculums no longer teach democratic values or critical thinking. Instead, history books have been rewritten, glorifying the Nazi conquest of Europe and presenting Hitler as a near-mythical figure who brought civilization to the lesser races. By the time these children reach adulthood, they know nothing of the freedoms their grandparents once had. They are soldiers of the Reich, both in body and mind. But while Europe submits, Eastern Europe has become something far worse, a land of death and extermination. Hitler's twisted vision of Lebensraum, or living space for the Aryan race, has led to an unprecedented genocide. In places like Poland, Ukraine, and Russia, entire cities have been razed, their populations either massacred or enslaved. The lucky few who survive live in constant terror, forced into labor camps where they toil under the most brutal conditions to serve the Nazi war machine. Villages that once thrived with life and culture now lie in ruins, replaced by German colonies. In these desolate lands, the Nazis are carrying out their final solution not only against Jews, but against entire ethnic groups. Slavs, Romani people, and others considered inferior are systematically exterminated. What remains of their cultures is either erased or twisted to serve the regime's needs. Millions more are deported, removed from their homes to make way for German settlers who are promised fertile land and wealth in the newly conquered territories. The East has become a living graveyard, where entire cultures are systematically erased from existence. Back in the West, democracies, once the pride of nations like the UK and France, are mere memories. Parliament buildings are abandoned. Political leaders who once fought for freedom are either executed or have fled into exile. Fascist puppets govern in their place, executing Hitler's orders with ruthless efficiency. In Britain, where Churchill once rallied the nation, a Nazi-friendly government now collaborates openly with the regime. The symbols of democracy, free elections, civil liberties, and freedom of the press are gone, replaced with fear, repression, and authoritarianism. Even in the Americas, democratic nations struggle to survive under the ever-growing shadow of fascism. The Third Reich has not only conquered Europe, it has become the most powerful military force on the planet. Nazi scientists, free from any ethical or moral constraints, have developed devastating new technologies. Jet-powered aircraft dominate the skies, and long-range ballistic missiles are capable of striking targets on other continents. But the most terrifying of all is their nuclear arsenal. In this world, the Nazi regime has succeeded where others failed. Atomic bombs now rest in the hands of the Führer, a weapon of unspeakable power that he wields as the ultimate threat against any nation daring to defy him. The Nazis don't need to conquer the world to control it. With the threat of nuclear devastation hanging over them, nations outside the Reich live in constant fear. Art, once a celebration of human creativity and diversity, has been co-opted as a tool for Nazi propaganda. Museums no longer display works by Picasso, Matisse, or any artist deemed degenerate by the regime. Those pieces have been burned or locked away, never to be seen again. In their place hang portraits of Aryan heroes, images of a world that glorifies the pure and powerful race. Music and literature follow suit. Only works that reflect the ideals of the Reich are allowed. Jazz, once the heartbeat of cities like Berlin and Paris, is forbidden, its African-American roots condemned by Nazi racial laws. Writers who dare to criticize the regime disappear, their books burned in the public squares, their names erased from history. In this world, creativity is dead. Education is nothing more than indoctrination. Universities, which once stood as bastions of free thought and intellectual debate, now churn out ideologues trained to serve the Nazi state. History lessons teach only of the Reich's greatness and its divine right to rule. Science is warped to support racist doctrines, with students taught the pseudoscience of Aryan superiority. Whole generations grow up in this system, knowing nothing but obedience to the Führer, believing they are destined to rule a world that must bend to their will. Yet, for all its might, the Nazi regime cannot fully suppress the human spirit. Across Europe, pockets of resistance still fight on, refusing to bow to fascism. In the mountains of France, the forests of Poland, and the underground tunnels of occupied cities, brave men and women risk their lives to sabotage Nazi operations. They are vastly outgunned, constantly hunted by the Gestapo, but they fight for something larger than themselves, a future where their children might once again live free. Resistance networks smuggle information, weapons, and hope to one another. Their victories are small, an ambushed convoy here, a sabotaged train there, but they are reminders that not all have given up the fight. Even as the world teeters on the edge of totalitarianism, a Cold War of sorts emerges between the Reich and the last few free nations. The United States, still holding on to its democracy, becomes the leader of the free world, a beacon of resistance against fascism. Yet it, too, lives in fear, knowing that Hitler's nuclear arsenal could bring devastation at any moment. The entire planet is now divided between those who live under Nazi rule and those who desperately fight to preserve what little remains of freedom. Latin America, Africa, and Asia are pressured to align with the Reich or risk invasion and destruction. In this global power struggle, no one is safe. The world under Nazi victory is not just one of physical conquest, it is a conquest of the soul. Human rights, dignity, and individual freedom have been sacrificed in the name of a twisted ideology. This is a world where resistance is dangerous, but submission is worse. A world where people have forgotten what it means to live free, where even the memory of democracy is fading. Entire generations grow up not knowing that another way of life was possible. This grim reality, a world shaped by genocide, repression, and fear, is what would have come to pass had Hitler triumphed. It is a world where the light of humanity has all but been extinguished, leaving only the darkness of totalitarianism to reign. And while resistance flickers on in hidden corners, the scars left by Nazi victory would mark humanity forever. This is the world of Hitler's victory, a world reshaped by fear, hatred, and the brutal dominance of the Nazi regime. It is a future that, thankfully, never came to be, but reminds us of the fragility of freedom and the high cost of resisting tyranny.